Okay. So firstly, let me introduce myself. My name is Gideon Taylor. I'm the chair of operations for the World Jewish Restitution Organization, otherwise known as the WJRO. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first WJRO My Property Story film screening webinar. This is truly an international gathering. We're joined today by people from 29 different countries. Our panelists are in New York, Hungary, and Israel. WJRO represents world Jewry in pursuing claims for the recovery of Jewish properties in Eastern and Central Europe. Our member organizations are 14 major Jewish international and Holocaust survivor organizations in US, Israel, and Europe. So the film series builds upon global conversations that were sparked over the past 2 years during the My Property Story social media campaign, which is based on the personal stories of Holocaust survivors and their families seeking justice for the expropriation of their property. So many of you had a chance to watch the free screening of the award-winning film 1945 that we'll be discussing today, that was available through the link in the invitation. If you were not able to watch the film yet, it will, as a bonus, be available for free on the link in the email up to midnight tonight. So you can click on that link and watch it up to midnight tonight. It's also available on a number of streaming services, and you can easily find it. And I would strongly urge you, if you haven't had a chance yet to watch the movie, to do so. The context of the film is at the core of WJRO's mission. During the Holocaust, Jews were robbed of their every possession by the Nazis and the Allies and collaborators in towns and cities across Europe. As the movie shows, while Jews were deported and murdered, their property remained. Pursuing justice for Holocaust survivors and their families is about an acknowledgement of what happened. It's about memory and a recognition that homes and businesses represent lifetimes of family life and labor. Ultimately, behind every piece of property is the story of a person and a family. As you will hear from the panelists, the post-Holocaust experiences of survivors varied in different countries and indeed in different towns and villages. In many countries, including in Hungary, the majority of Holocaust victims died heirless, with entire families wiped out. As 47 countries said in 2009 when issuing the Terezin Declaration, restitution or compensation for heirless property should be used to help needy Holocaust survivors and to ensure ongoing education about the causes and the consequences of the Holocaust. Unfortunately, restitution or compensation for private property, especially that with no heirs, has moved slowly. Last week, the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, publicly pledged to work with WJRO to help countries meet Holocaust property restitution commitments. His powerful declaration of support at the beginning of this new US administration gives us great hope that progress can be made in this struggle for justice. The film, 1945, which was directed and co-written by one of our panel members, Ferenc Török, examines the aftermath of the Holocaust from the perspective of residents of the town, as well as two anonymous Jewish Holocaust survivors. We're deeply honored to have on our panel today, Ferenc Török, Dr. Joanna Sliwa, who is historian at the Claims Conference, and Menachem Steiner, a child of Holocaust survivors. Firstly, each panel member will speak, and then we'll take questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have any questions, please type them at any time into the question box at the bottom of the screen. We'll be monitoring the questions throughout the webinar, and we'll try to have the panel address as many of the questions that we have time for at the end of the presentations. The webinar will be 1.25 hours. So before I introduce our panel, I want to invite you to watch a clip from the film. If we could go ahead and share that, just to give you a sense of the movie. Thank you.
Mit parancsolsz, Jancsike?
Dohányt szeretnék.
Adjál neki, fiam, meg tölts egy pohár pezsgőt is.
Pezsgőt parasztnak, István bátyja. Kár az olyan drága italért.
Új világ van. Nem számít, ki úr, ki paraszt. Igaz? Csak magyar legyen. Na?
Minden jót.
Jó napot.
Jó napot.
Gyere már. András vissza akarja adni a házat.
Tudom, anyja kínja.
Hiába, arán nem hallgat.
Jó, majd beszélek a fejével. Te meg addig foglalkozzál az asszonyokkal.
Mondanom kell magának valamit. Az apja íratta velem a feljelentő levelet polák ellen. Ezért vitték el előbb, mint a többieket. Ha visszajönnek, magának tudnia kell.
Mit akart itt a kustár?
Tudja azt maga nagyon jól.
Mit tudsz te? Egy lányt se tudtál keríteni magadnak. A katonaságot is én intéztem el. Egy vagyonba került, hogy ne vigyenek el megdögleni a frontról, és akkor te pofázol nekem. Hát ezt is én intéztem.
Visszaadom a boltot.
Dehogy adod. Dehogy adod. Az anyád keservit. Nem adod. Na. Nem képzeled, hogy csak úgy visszaadjuk a jussunkat? Papír van róla, hogy a tied. Készülsz valahova? Hol még?
Még nem tudom. Talán Pestre.
Mit képzelsz? Azt hiszed, külön vagy nálam?
Na ég áldja.
Hé, mit csinálsz? Halló, mit csinálsz? Hova mégy?
Okay, so that's a opportunity to see a little bit of the movie. So I want to introduce one of our panelists. Joanna Sliwa is a historian at the Claims Conference, an expert in this era of history. And we asked Joanna to join us today to give us a little bit of the context and the history around the movie. Joanna, joining us from New York. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you so much, Gideon. Thank you and welcome, everyone. Thank you to the WJRO for inviting me to be part of this very important new series. It is a great honor for me to be in the company of my fellow panelists. As Gideon mentioned, I joined today's event as a historian, and my goal in the next several minutes is twofold. One is to provide an overview of the challenges that Jewish survivors faced upon their return to their homelands and hometowns in East and Central Europe. And number two is to raise some broader historical issues that arise from this very powerful film, 1945. And I hope everyone can see my presentation. Yes, okay. We begin with the story of David Abrams. David, whose photograph you see here, this is his post-war photograph, obviously, was 12 years old when Hungary annexed his hometown, Dej, from Romania. And on the map here, you see the territory of Hungary in 1941. This next map traces Hungary's expansion in 1938, 1941, and you see Dej marked in red. David's story contextualizes the history that shapes the plot of the film. David, his 7 siblings, his father and stepmother, were among the 800,000 Jews of Hungary who managed to survive relatively intact into March 1944. Then Nazi Germany occupied Hungary. The Hungarian authorities rounded up David and his family, concentrated them in a ghetto, and plundered their property. The Hungarian National Railway organized the deportation of David and over 400,000 Jews, mainly to Auschwitz. On this map here, you see the map of Hungary with major ghettos that are marked. In red, you see the city of Szeged. And the photographs that you see on this slide here, on the top is the interior of a synagogue that is filled with possessions of deported Jews. And on the bottom, you see the assembling, the collecting of Jews from the town of Szeged, from the ghetto, and then being led for deportation. And this is done during broad daylight, and you see people, ordinary people, Hungarians, observing this situation. Complicity in the Holocaust was neither marginal, nor did it belong only to the authorities. As in the film, as we have seen in the film, ordinary people benefited from the looting. When David Abrams was liberated in 1945, the borders had changed, and David returned to his hometown in Romania. The film 1945 provides a really unique lens on this transition period in the immediate aftermath of the war. As the 2 Jewish survivors in the film, David took the journey by train in reverse. So from the camp where he was liberated to his hometown. The train in the film may symbolize 2 things. At least that is how I see it. One is the difficult past that survivors were forced to grapple with. And 2 is the historical legacy that non-Jews must work through. Survivors returned to their homes in waves. About 40,000 Jews crossed from then Soviet-occupied territory of today's Moldova to Romania, beginning in April 1945, so still during the war. This group consisted of some Romanian Jews who had survived deportation to Transnistria in 1941, 1942. And you see the area of Transnistria marked in the darker brown color. Other Jews were non-Romanian refugees who entered into Romanian territory. Now, some Romanians feared that these Jewish returnees and refugees were agents of communism And so attacks against Jews and murders of Jews were common. And here you see on this slide 3 excerpts from government reports in Romania that highlight the difficulties and some of the dangers that Jewish survivors faced in Romania in April, May 1945. In this situation, for many Jewish returnees and refugees, Romania served only as a transit place and not as a place to settle. Many survivors had no place to return to. In the towns and villages, their houses, barns, businesses, fields, and various items such as furniture, clothes, various equipment, all that changed hands, and it now belonged to non-Jews. Lydia Bitten Jackson was 14 years old when she reached Shamorin in what was then Czechoslovakia with her mother and her brother. And you see the family on this photograph here. And on the map, you see the journey, the rather long journey that they had to make from the camp in Muldorf in Germany to their hometown in Shamorin. They hoped that by returning home, they would also reunite with Lydia's father and to rebuild their lives. However, out of the over 300 Jews who were deported from the town, only 35 returned, and Lydia's father was not among them. Neighbors often greeted returning survivors with disbelief and even enmity. For many non-Jews across Central and Eastern Europe, the Holocaust offered opportunities for enrichment. So these local people did not expect the Jews to come back. And therefore, the 2 returning Jews in the film 1945 are subjects of both curiosity and suspicion. Confronting with survivors, so when local people confronted returning survivors, that elicited emotions such as resentment, anger, guilt, even fear. There was also very little acknowledgement of the Jews' suffering. Many non-Jews claimed that they too suffered, first under the German and then under the occupation. But Lydia's Slovak neighbors were pleased to see that she, her mother, and brother survived. That was exceptional. Lydia and her family stayed in the town for a few years, but it was too traumatic for them to live in a place that reminded them of death and destruction. Since the borders were officially closed, the family escaped to a displaced persons camp in Germany in 1949. They were smuggled across the borders. Lydia was among the 1 million refugees, including about 250,000 Jews that entered DP camps. Other Jewish survivors encountered hostility that turned into violence. In Poland, members of the Polish nationalist groups killed about 200 Jewish repatriates who were traveling on trains from the Soviet Union. Returning Jews were murdered and threatened across Central and Eastern Europe. And that was done to discourage them from settling down and from reclaiming their properties. For example, in Miskolc, in July 1946, in Hungary, non-Jewish Hungarians killed 2 Jewish men whom they accused of profiteering. That same month, non-Jewish Poles staged a deadly pogrom against Jewish survivors in the city of Kielce by fanning the flames of a centuries-old legend that Jews kidnapped Christian children to use their blood in rituals. And 41 Jews lost their lives in Kielce. And here on this slide, you see the photograph from the funeral of the victims of the Kielce pogrom. You also see on the bottom that is an excerpt from the Jewish Telegraphic Agency daily bulletin that reported on the attacks against Jews in Miskolc. And on the left, I understand that you may not be able to read it, but I will tell you what it is. That's also from JTA, Jewish Telegraphic Agency, from August 1945, that reports on the situation of Jews in Slovakia. And it says that there was immense anti-Semitism against Jews who were returning. And many Jews could not reclaim their property, and so they could not rebuild their lives. And this situation really pushed many survivors to escape from Slovakia. They didn't see a future for themselves. Still, many Jews tried to resume their lives in their home countries. They considered property security a precondition for a Jewish revival and as a marker of justice. But after the war, in communist-run countries, property became nationalized. The practice of religion came under government purview. In Kamieniec-Podolski, a town in Soviet Ukraine that you see on the map marked in green, the authorities there refused to return the synagogue, the only surviving synagogue that you see in the photograph there on the bottom. They refused to return it to the local Jewish community. Jews were also confronted with constant reminders of the destruction that they faced during the Holocaust, and with the lack of respect for the memory of the murdered. In that same town, in Kamieniec-Podolski, the local authorities also refused to remove broken matzavot, tombstones, from the road, from sidewalks. And here you see a photograph was taken in 2014 of a fragment of a tombstone from a Jewish cemetery that was still in the sidewalk. The aftermath of the Holocaust in Central and Eastern Europe brimmed with unrest and with unresolved issues surrounding Jewish property. And these in turn, as we have seen in the film, and I hope for those of you who have not seen the film that you will see that in the film, inflamed conflicts among local people. As the plot surrounding the wedding shows us, again from the film, addressing difficult topics is a precondition for forging intergroup relations. The clocks are ticking in the film, and the time to confront the past, including the complicity in the dispossession of Jews, is of utmost importance and urgency. But whose responsibility is it? It is not a coincidence that the two survivors, and now I'm giving away some from the film for those who haven't seen it, but it is not a coincidence that the two survivors buried the contents of the trunk in the Jewish cemetery. As we have seen through the lens of the film, the responsibility to address past wrongs does not evaporate. It belongs also to the next generation. The responsibility to remember and to make amends is passed on to the population that remains in spaces where few or no Jews remain. Thank you.
Great. Joanna, thank you so much. I think it really, you've just given us a sort of a sense of the wider context around this film in a really very graphic and thoughtful way. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to circle back. As I mentioned, if anyone has questions, either in general, either for Joanna or for any of the other panelists, just go ahead and enter them right in the question and answer box at the bottom, along the bottom. You should be able to see it there, so you can absolutely just send us any kind of questions and we'll try and handle those. There's already a few questions coming in, and feel free to add any questions or comments that you would like to share. Other point I just want to mention, and because there's so much of useful and thoughtful information from what we heard from Joanna, and we'll hear from the panelists, the event today is recorded. We'll be making it available through our website, and we'll also circulate to everyone who registered a link to the recording, so that if you do want to share it with others, you'll be able to do that. Okay, so I'd like to welcome our next panel member, our star today, Ferenc Török. So Ferenc is an award-winning Hungarian film director. He joins us today from Budapest. As you can see, he's at home. He very graciously joining us today. He expresses appreciation to his wife for helping with some of the tech setup. So we're glad that we were able to connect with you. Ferenc has made a number of wonderful films. He's received an award for recognition for outstanding achievement in filmmaking from Hungary. The film 1945 also won important prizes, including at the Jerusalem International Film Festival. Ferenc is a member of the European Film Academy, and we are so pleased that you could join us today, Ferenc. Thank you. And it's good to have you. And I guess it's one of the advantages, if there are any, to this new world of Zoom and connection, that you can be with us with people from 29 countries around the world joining us today. So it's wonderful to have you with us. And I guess I just wanted to start by asking you, how did you come to the story of 1945?
So, good evening. You hear me?
Perfectly.
Okay. So now I'm in Budapest, evening, close to sunset. So thank you for the invitation. So the story of the script is not mine. My friend Gábor T. Santo wrote the short story 2004, and we start together, build a script. It's a fiction story, of course, like a Western movie or a antique drama, but of course 10 or 12 years pre-production. We've been lots of cemeteries around Miskolc, Ungvár, and we looking for the village. And of course, we built up the script step by step. It was a long story, not easy to finance, of course, but the build up the story was a big challenge, I think. But yeah, so the premiere was 3-4 years ago. So I think, yeah, it was a long journey, maybe 15 years of my life.
So look, it's we're all very fortunate to have had a chance to get the benefit of what you've put into this movie, and clearly so much of your personal energy has gone into this. So do you have any family connections to the issues around the Holocaust? Does this
yeah, around us in Budapest, so it's every family connected somehow for the Holocaust. So it's not it's a shame of our country or our history, but yeah. So when my children grown up and ask me all the time about the grandmother stories and yeah, and Gábor, who wrote the short story, also had a lot of story in the family, deportation, and so yeah. Of course, the personal connection is really important when you want to make a movie or a story. But it's a fiction movie, so we built up a drama in an unknown fiction village somewhere in north of Hungary, close to the Slovakian border or the Ukrainian, Romanian. So it's a transportation of the science and the knowledge when to make a construction or a fiction story. So, but it's also really important, I think, the photography, the black and white, because when I read the first time the short story of Gabor, I have watched only black and white pictures, and in this period for me so it's much clear, and we want to make a clear, straight story, and we want to make a simple story. So it's, of course, is a really problematic question, but that's why we focus for the property. That's why we focus for the real things, the not the ideological background. And I think so. It's not an easy topic, but in Hungary sometimes the people say is this movie is not good for Hungary, or is a problematic question in Budapest at the moment. So it's not, we are not over this story. So yeah.
So let's, a number of things you said that are just so interesting. So first question I want to follow on just on what you just said. The movie, shooting the movie black and white. So there's not a lot, so not so common these days to see a movie in black and white. That must have been obviously a big decision to make. Tell us a little bit about what went into your thinking to film this in black and white.
The photographs or the archive movies, what we have seen, or so from that period, it was of course black and white, and the topic is black and white for me, and the spirituality of the black and white between the reality and the fiction is really important because we want to make not a action movie. We want to try a way for the spiritual movie, because the two Jews in the movie, they believe God, and their spiritual level. So this way is a of course, is a journey for understand how we can step into the future after that, and is not possible with realistic. Is not is we need some help from somewhere. From the music, from the religion, from the past, or from the organ environment. So some energy, because we don't want to make just a criminal story, and it's a trick for the Gabor basic story, the misunderstanding. The Jews arrived to the cemetery, not for the shop, not for the property, but everybody in the environment afraid, because paranoid. They remember the last summer deportation when the same station in the Hungarian railway was the Jews deported, and so yeah.
So you know what, you just touched upon it there. Look, this is obviously is a hard issue for Hungary. I mean, it goes to the national narrative. It goes into people's relationship with their neighbors, and it shows and exposes a side sometimes that's positive and sometimes that's not so positive. How is it to make a movie like this in Hungary today? How was the reaction to the movie in Hungary? And give us a sense of that. I think is of great interest, because it's powerful and it raises challenging issues, not easy ones.
No, yeah. So it's not an easy issue. So one young film director in Poland, after a movie premiere so this topic was suicide a couple of years ago. So it's this horrible story sometimes, but I'm successful with this because my target was my children. I want to tell a story to my children because I believe the future, and we want to tell this story, I think. So
can I ask, how old are your children?
20, 18, so that's clever guys. They want to know everything. So not only just one perspective. So yeah, but of course the audience was good in Hungary. The Budapest, not only the intellectuals, wide audience, and Netflix, HBO pick up the movie. We have a great distributor in the US, Menachem. So yeah, it was good, but the reaction. So, for example, in Hungary, I'm not a favorite director of the government or and I work in theater, but I have got international connections. So I want to make a movie. After that movie, 1945. Okay, it was a Jewish swimmer story. It's a big story in Hungary. Alfred Hajós is the first Olympic winner guy, and stop it and no this topic again, and so it's not easy to tell the situation, but of course we can do independent movies. Or in that time when we shoot this movie 15 and 2015, it was a little bit better. Now in the culture and in every art, not only for the COVID, but only the power stop the critical and problematic issues. And so that's the truth.
So are you, I guess, last question I want to ask you now, and then we'll see, we have some more questions at the end, but I just want to ask you, are you optimistic about the way a younger generation, your children's age and maybe younger, how they will take lessons from the past, what they will take? Are you positive that for Hungary and the way it looks at its history and what it can learn from it?
We need to positive. We have no any choice. So I'm very so is not a so the discrimination and the corruption and the property conditions. Sometimes, if together, these three combination, it's really dangerous. And sometimes now in the present time, politic games, I feel also the corruption and discrimination combinations. And I'm not a lawyer, but sometimes I feel my property is my movie. So, for example, so I feel when somebody wants to stolen something. So that's the.
Okay. Great. Look, this is great. It's just fascinating. And I'm going to call now on our next panelist, but I want to just, if you'll hang by, and I want to circle back to hear some more. We've some more questions coming in, and I want to just come back to you. So thank you, Ferenc. So let me turn now to Dr. Menachem Steiner, who's joining us from Israel. So we are covering a broad geographic range for our panelists as well as for our participants. Menachem was born 2 years after the Holocaust ended in Krasnodar, Romania, to Holocaust survivors. And as a teenager, he emigrated with his family to Australia. He became a respected professor with a PhD in mathematics and a fellowship in engineering education. In 2002, he and his wife made Aliyah to Israel. Currently, he's retired and he serves voluntarily with a number of organizations, including he has worked and helped the WJRO. And wanted to get your sort of perspective as family with strong roots in the area. Menachem.
Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me.
Perfectly.
Greetings from the holy city of Jerusalem. I was born in the year 1947 in Krasna, a small town in Transylvania, in Romania, to my parents, Shimon and Rachel, of blessed memory, both Holocaust survivors. This was the year when Transylvania, a region of Hungary, became part of Romania. So I presume that the Jews in this area underwent the same persecution, including those depicted in Ferenc's film 1945, as the rest of the Hungarian Jewry. What I can recount with certainty from what I heard later, from what I was told later, is that prior to the deportation in 1944, my father was taken to a forced labor camp in Hungary, often tortured and beaten, and then sent to build railroads in Russia. Prior to the deportation, my grandfather, Menachem, after whom I'm named, owned a flour mill and an electric generating plant in Krasna. He was very well established, highly respected by all, and even served as the head of the Jewish community for some years. In the year 1944, both my parents, who were first cousins, their parents and siblings, large families from Krasna and Margita respectively, were gathered to the brick factory ghetto in Shimleol-Sivanie, and after 5 days of starvation and hardship, they were transported to Auschwitz. 1947 was also the year in which Romania became the Romanian People's Republic under a communist regime. Under this regime, every private business, including my grandfather's flour mill, generator plant, and the whole suite of storerooms, was nationalized. Out of hundreds of Jewish people living in Krasna before the Holocaust, only 9 young men, including my father, and some young ladies returned to Krasna, hoping to find remnants of their families who also survived the horrible inferno. Unfortunately, this was not the case. Nobody survived. They all perished in the gas chambers of the Nazis. My father, for example, was the sole survivor from his large family. My father returned to his old home and even found the dishes and the remnants of food from their last family meal before they were taken away to the ghetto. His family was so much respected that the non-Jewish neighbors looked after the house and belongings, so much so that they didn't even clean these dishes in order not to contaminate their kashrut. My mother and her 2 surviving sisters, who also returned, also moved into my father's house. These young returnees were very lonely, confused, and very anxious to have a family. My parents were the first ones to be married, and later others got married shortly after in my parents' house. I was the first child born in Krasna after the Holocaust and became the child of the whole small Jewish community. Until my bar mitzvah at age 13, there were only 9 adults in town, one short for a proper congregation, minyan, of 10 adults. In the absence of visitors, they placed the Chumash, Holy Scripture, in my cradle and later in my hands to make up the missing adult. I vividly remember my bar mitzvah in my home when the day I turned 13 years old, the day I qualified halachically as an adult, a celebration mixed with cry and joy. It was the first time that a community of hundreds before the Holocaust had a proper minyan of 10 adults again. The small number of families were all religious, prepared everything at home, same menu in every household each day. And even the chont, which was often confused when picked up from the common oven before Shabbat. My father took upon himself the responsibilities of the religious life in the small community. He was the Baal Tefillah, conducting the services, blew the shofar, procured the etrog on Sukkot, made sure that the mikveh, the ritual bath, was functional, arranged the matzah baking, etc., etc. I remember our house as a child always cold in winter. Together with my father, we took the heating wood from our home on a sled in the snow to heat the mikveh. The religious life was by no means easy. There was no kosher butcher or anything kosher available. Everything was prepared at home. I remember as a child taking a chicken in a carton box on my back to Shimlel, a city 11 kilometers away, to the shochet for ritual slaughter. And on one occasion, the chicken did not survive the journey. We always made kiddush on homemade challah as no kosher wine was available. Since we could not afford a private religious instructor or an elementary school for a cheder for Torah learning, for the few children for a very long, my father was the one who taught me Torah. My father was employed in a governmental establishment called Aprozar, which bought agricultural produce from the farmers in Krasna and neighboring towns and sent them to the big cities, army, hospitals, etc. I remember that often when I went to help my father, unmarked detectives from the security department made surprise spot checks to check the accuracy of the weighing scales. If God forbid the scales were out by even a minuscule amount, the punishment was very severe, even imprisonment for a few years. The harsh law enforcement by the communist regime affected everybody. My father's wage was minimal, especially for a religious Jew trying to acquire the religious needs of the community. Until this day, I cannot figure out how did he manage to save enough money to procure an etrog for the community in that time. The Shabbat and religious Jewish holidays were work as usual. I remember that on one Yom Tov, on the high holidays, my father left his place of work to the synagogue, and he was taken away from there to Zalel, a neighboring town, for interrogation and reprimanded. It was one of the rare occasions when my mother prepared a festive meal with meat and not chicken, and we conducted the meal with some guests without my father present. It was such an unpleasant Yom Tov, which I will never forget. This event was not a direct result of anti-Semitism, I think. We did not experience any open anti-Semitism. My family was respected by both Jews and non-Jews. The communist regime demanded respect to all citizens, including Jews. However, it was an anti-religious regime. It did not encourage religious practice, no matter what the religion was. For example, dances or other activities which were very much liked by the non-Jewish young student population were all scheduled for Sundays, the time when people attended the churches. I topped every year of my elementary school in Krasna, but I was not accepted to high school because we applied for Aliyah to go to Israel. However, my mother, who herself was deprived from learning, went up to the headquarters of the Communist Party in Bucharest to fight for my admission. She told me that she was ousted from one door and entered through another with no fear, until finally I was accepted to the high school in the neighboring city in Shimleo-Silvanie. There was school on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, on high holidays, so I had to attend. However, I never wrote nor did anything that the Jewish religion prohibits. I always excelled and even won a mathematics Olympiad. The standard was very high and I enjoyed my school years very, very much. Despite the poor conditions, I remember a happy childhood, as did other 15 children or so in town. My only sister was born when I was 7 years old. Most people could not afford more than 1 or 2 children. We had no high expectations. Everything, this event that enters my mind was the funeral of my good friend on a miserable day of a rainy day, not Tisha B'Av day. The single funeral that in Krasna during my years there. My parents applied to live for Israel many times. On a few occasions, they were successful. They sold their belongings, but at the last minute. So they returned to start afresh. I left Romania to Israel in 1963 when I was 16 years old. We had to pay a huge amount to renounce our Romanian citizenship, ownership of our house. We were not allowed to take out from Romania any monies or coins, nothing, not even a photo with writing on the back, except 50 Berrigan cigarettes. My Olympiad medal, which I won, mentioned before, was left behind, hanging in the bedroom of a non-Jewish friend. We flew to Rome, and the bus was waiting to take us to Naples to embark on a ship to Israel. My mother and his sister already climbed into the bus, and suddenly we heard 2 ladies from the highest immigration service calling out our family name. They presented us with a letter from my aunt, who herself left Israel to Australia, describing the difficult period in Israel during those years, the possibility of me entering university studies, the army, etc. And there was a strict censorship in Romania. She sent to us this letter via the highest organization. As the bus had to leave, we literally had minutes to make up our mind what to do. My parents had to make a very, very quick decision. My father tossed up a coin, which he borrowed from a person nearby. The outcome of the toss was Australia, so we had to wait in Rome for a visa to Australia. With the help of the highest service, we lived in Rome for approximately 1 year, the 4 of us in one room, on food coupons and bus tickets. I was selling shoes in Piazza Vittoria in Rome. After approximately 1 year, we left for Melbourne, Australia on the Achille Lauro on its last voyage. It was not a luxurious liner by any means, and the weather conditions were miserable. My father and I shared the cabin with a few Arab men, and my mother and sister with the women. After a month-long journey, we finally arrived in Melbourne, Australia in January 1964 to start a new life with practically no language skills nor possessions. Without any language skills, my parents worked very hard. My father in a wholesale food distribution business and my mother pressing blouses in a factory. Subsequently, they opened a kosher restaurant in Melbourne. My father, mother, and sister passed away in 1983, 2007, and 2014, respectively, and they were brought to eternal rest in Jerusalem. At the age of 17, I completed the last year of my high school in Yeshiva College in Melbourne, entered Monash University when I received my Doctor of Philosophy and Applied Mathematics in 1973. I then joined the academic staff of Monash at Swinburne Universities and served as chairman of the Engineering Mathematics Group of Australia during 1992 and 1996. In 1998, I was bestowed with the inaugural award of the Institution of Engineers of Australia for my contributions to engineering mathematics in Australia. I got married to Dina in December 1970 and were blessed with 5 children, 1 living in Israel and the others abroad. Together with my wife Dina, I made Aliyah to Israel in 2002, joined the academic staff of the Jerusalem College of Technology, where I served as rector during 2003 to 2014. I'm currently retired, and alongside my Torah studies and scientific research, I serve voluntarily for various organizations. Just to finish off, I want to tell you that I visited Krasna together with my wife some 20 years ago and seen the flour mill with the name Steiner engraved in the walls. I held in my hand the ladle used by my grandfather Menachem to measure the amount of grain payment for the milling, and also the street full of the former storerooms converted to clothing factories. My Olympiad medal mentioned before was still hanging in the bedroom of the dying, sick, elderly, non-Jewish friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Menachem. Fascinating. And really thank you to all our panelists for helping shed insight into this chapter of history that has had such an impact on so many people and on our whole society. So we've got a large number of questions, so I'm going to try and take some of them as best we can. I'm going to turn first to Joanna, if I can. Joanna, one of the questions that came in asked, why did some Jews decide to return to their hometowns and some not? What was the sort of circumstances that shaped their decisions, the different stories that you've heard, and what were the kind of different things that were going on at the time that shaped the decisions that Holocaust survivors made?
Thank you. And I will be very brief because we don't have that much time and I can go on and on. But I will say this, and this is very important, that survivors returned home because they considered to be, if we talk about Hungary, if we talk about Poland, they considered to be Polish. They wanted to return to their homes. They wanted to resume their lives. They wanted to go back and live in their homes, go back to their work, and so on. And that was not always possible, and not because the survivors didn't want to. It was because the local community usually did not want these survivors. Survivors also returned to look for their loved ones, to see if anyone survived. They also returned because they considered themselves to be the memory keepers of those who were murdered. So there are many different reasons why they returned. Also, the experiences differed depending on where the survivors settled after the war throughout Poland. It really differed on different factors were in play. And I think this is a larger conversation, so I will stop here. And Gideon, back to you.
Great, thank you. Thank you. A fascinating topic, worthy of exploration in itself. So Ferenc, if I can turn to you. So one question that just came in said in pre-1989 in Eastern Central Europe, the artists traditionally played an important role in challenging national myths. And you know, the role of the artist was very special in terms of shaping the national narratives. Do you see yourself, the question says, in this tradition in post-2010? Do you see this as a role for artists? Do you see it as a role for yourself? You're on mute, so yeah, you need to unmute.
Unmute?
Great. Yes, got
Sorry.
you.
The question was complicated for me. Please help me. Sorry, my English is a little bit limited. Sorry about that.
No, I guess the question is how do you see the role of the artist in challenging the stories and what the positions of the government and the positions of history, and how do you see the role of the artist and the role of you in that regard?
Okay, the artist or the storyteller is a really important provocateur or independent subject, I think. When I was university student, my teacher said all the time. So our mission is the storytelling, and the storytelling is our power, I think. So the artist is just a storyteller, and not too much, I think. A good artist, I think, is small.
Well, I'm not sure that all the non-artists among us would quite would quite agree. I think for many of us, even if the artist or this artist sets a narrow goal, I think clearly the impact for many of us is broader than that. But interesting to hear to hear your thought. So. A question just came in that said that you called the film a Western, and someone gave said they saw a reference to the film High Noon. Do you see a connection to the, or what connection do you see to this, to the traditional Western?
Yeah. So in the short story, in the beginning, I feel the Western, and it's only 1 hour in noon time. So in summer, it's like really Western, and the train station also, and the hats, and the black and white. So. And also the High Noon is a 1945 movie. Is that age. So also, and I love High Noon in the students' time. But now, a couple of years ago, I watched again because the High Noon is like a clock. So it's really clear but simple, but like the time, and I want to make a movie like a horse knocking, like is a noisy but really exactly in the good rhythm. So that's why the High Noon is not only a Western. For me, is a really effective movie. So
fascinating. So can I switch back to Joanna? So a number of people asked, coming back to the question you touched upon, the experience of Jews coming back, was it very different in Western Europe to Eastern Europe? And if so, why? And I guess connected to that, were there many positive stories? We heard Professor Steiner's, Menachem's story. Was it more negative? Was it more positive? How would you sort of look at that? There were a number of questions asking that.
Thank you. So, of course, there were many stories. There is no one story of return. And as you mentioned, Gideon, what Professor Steiner was saying, that it was more of a positive story for his parents, when they were welcomed. I mentioned the story of David Abrams. He was welcomed when he returned to his hometown, Lydia. Another survivor was welcomed, although her entire house was robbed of anything. Even the doors were missing to her house, but still her closest neighbors welcomed home. The situation differed for many other survivors returning home, and that's why I mostly focused in my talk and my framing on these less positive and often very tragic stories. In terms, and everyone had their story, and it's not like everyone who returned immediately left. Obviously, people stayed. They found They found purpose, they found meaning, they found ways to make a living and to resume their lives, to create a thriving Jewish culture that existed, for example, in Poland in the early post-war years. And there's emerging research on that being done. And that is a fascinating topic, how survivors struggle to rebuild their lives. And to an extent, were very successful in doing so. In terms of differences between Central Eastern Europe and Western Europe, that is, again, a very large discussion. And I think what I would like to point out is that hostility toward Jews was not confined only to Eastern and Central Europe. Jews returning to Germany, to Austria, to France also encountered anti-Semitism. In France, they often were some survivors were hesitant to admit that they were Jewish. They still feared another Holocaust, another kind of attack against them. And again, I would like to point out to new research that is emerging on this topic of return and what did it mean for Jews to return. One book that I highly, highly recommend, and this is about the Austrian case. We know much about the German case, but what happened to Austrian Jews who returned? What did they encounter back in their hometown? Elizabeth Anthony wrote a book on compromise of return about the Viennese Jewish community. And I think this is, I will end with a recommendation for further reading on this.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. A fascinating subject that I suspect researchers will still continue to learn about and to uncover. Ferenc, there's a question someone wrote, and I'm just going to read it exactly as it is. A young Polish woman I know here in New York was asked in a gathering, "Are you Jewish?" She answered in anger, "No." Then she said quietly, "I don't know," and walked away. So is that either denial or sometimes ignorance of one's roots? Is that common in Hungary? Is that still and certainly from the post-communist era, immediate post-communist era and today, how does that awareness, connection, knowledge to Jewish roots in Hungary play itself out today and in your experience? You're on mute. The famous sentence that we all are so used to in this world. You're on mute. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Ferenc, got you. Yeah, we hear you.
So my family basically is not a Jewish family, but the Christian families is much more complicated also in Eastern Europe. So, and we had a lot of mixed family, so unreligious and communist families. So so not an easy question, because I think the human being is only one. The tragic in this period in 45, the human being disappeared and lost everything what we respect in the human being, and a lot of good Christian people and unreligious people in Hungary feel it's a real shame, and we want to build a different future, and we want to speak about this topic clearly, and so
right.
okay.
Yes, thank you. It touches on deep issues, and it's clearly these go deep in society in Hungary and in other countries. So Menachem, one last question I just want to ask. What do you think, and as a couple of people posed it here as well, and I'm going to pose it to you. What do you think younger people, not necessarily in Hungary, but outside of Hungary today, can learn from stories? I don't mean specifically from the movie, but from stories like your family story and what happened to Holocaust survivors. Do you think young people can learn? Is it something they can take from this that affects our society, that can affect our society going forward in the wider world?
I think the answer is definitely yes. I try to convey to my own children some of the experience which I experienced. You know, we left Romania very late, in 1963. And sometimes the children of today, they don't even comprehend, the hardship or the conditions of life, in the time when I was a child. There were no electronic games. There were no, we had the little wheel, and we, with the color, we just used to play, or we used to read, whatever. We appreciated reading, we appreciated studying. I think the school was of, I'm an educator, but I think that the school was of much higher standard what it is today. And if I can instill in my own children and other people with my stories, the greater love for learning and appreciating what you have, I think it's a tremendous thing. Now, as I said in my speech, the life in Romania, as a child, it wasn't easy. People were afraid of the, of the harshness of the communist regime, etc. And the handful of Jews, the very small community, it wasn't an ideal community.
Right.
But, the interaction between people and the love and care for each other and the sacrifice for the community, which my father personally, to be called at home, and to take the wood to heat up the ritual bath is something to be admired, and I think the new generation can learn a lot from this.
You're right, and I think you're quite right. So, look, I think we're drawing to a close. I want to really thank each one of the panelists. Obviously, Ferenc, for bringing us such a wonderful piece of art, a piece of education, a narrative, a story, and something simple on one level and complicated on others. And to both to Menachem and to Joanna for adding so much to this conversation. I want to acknowledge also the Claims Conference, which was an initial funder of the movie and gave some support in an initial phase. I think it's important that the restitution funds can go to help educate people and to bring these kind of stories. I want to remind everyone that the third story, the third annual My Property Story social media campaign will launch later this year. They will help highlight the personal stories of Holocaust survivors like this. We will inform you about it. We encourage people who have stories to tell to share stories or videos or photos through that campaign. We will email out to you so you'll all hear about it when it happens. We hope to have another webinar in this series of a film screening. And more information. There were some questions about Holocaust restitution. The website of WJRO, World Jewish Restitution Organization, www.wjro.org.il. You can reach the website and see information both about the campaign and about restitution, and some of the questions that came in today are answered there. A big thank you to Lisa Sherman-Cohen, who put a tremendous amount of time in bringing us together. And as I look I see in New York, I see Israel, and I see in Budapest that the sun has now set. I see it's dark outside, and really I thank you all for coming together. I thank you for joining us, those of you from around the world, and look forward to learning more and continuing this conversation. Thank you all.